Today I want to talk about something I believe is one of the most important patterns in all of human history. And once you truly understand this pattern, everything happening right now in the Middle East will make complete sense to you. The pattern is this. Every great empire that has ever tried to conquer Iran, Persia, has either collapsed, retreated, or been permanently weakened. Every single one, no exceptions. And I want to argue today, using game theory and structural history, that America is next. So let us begin. Let us go back and look at history carefully. Because history does not repeat itself exactly. But as Mark Twain said, it rhymes. And in the case of Iran, it rhymes very, very loudly. First, Alexander the Great. Everyone knows Alexander. He conquered Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia, which is present-day Iran. And people say, wait a minute, did Alexander not actually win? Did he not conquer Persia? Yes, he technically conquered Persia, but what happened after that? He died at 32 years old. His empire immediately fell apart. His generals turned on each other. The Macedonian Empire was finished, and in its place, who rose to power? The Parthians, Iranians, who then controlled the Middle East for the next 500 years. So the lesson here is simple. You can temporarily defeat Iran, but Iran defeats you in the long run. Second, the Roman Empire. The Romans were the greatest military force the ancient world had ever seen. Nobody came close. And the Romans fought the Parthians, the Iranians, for over 300 years. Julius Caesar was planning to invade Persia, but was assassinated before he ever got the chance. Emperor Crassus invaded and was destroyed at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE. One of the worst military defeats Rome ever suffered. Emperor Trajan invaded and technically won, but was immediately forced to retreat because uprisings were breaking out everywhere. Emperor Julian invaded in 363 CE and died in battle. 300 years of war. And what happened to Rome? Rome fell while Iran, the Sasanian Persian Empire, was still standing. Third, the Arab Caliphate. People often forget this part, but the Arabs did conquer Iran in the 7th century CE. Yet what happened next? Iran absorbed its Arab conquerors. The Persians converted to Islam. Yes, but they transformed Islam into something distinctly and unmistakably Persian. They gave the world Persian art, poetry, philosophy, and science. Within a few centuries, Iranian dynasties like the Buyids, the Samanids, and the Safavids were ruling again. Iran was never truly conquered. It absorbed its conquerors and made them Iranian. Fourth, the Mongols. This is perhaps the most dramatic example of all. The Mongols in the 13th century were the most destructive military force in all of human history. They destroyed Baghdad. They wiped out cities across Central Asia. They killed millions of people. And yes, they conquered Iran. But again, what happened next? The Mongol conquerors converted to Islam, adopted Persian culture, and became Persian themselves. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol rulers of Iran, became devoted patrons of Persian art and literature. Iran absorbed the Mongols completely. Fifth, the Soviet Union. More recently, in the 20th century, the Soviet Union occupied northern Iran twice. Once during World War I and once during World War II. Both times they were eventually forced to leave. In 1946, Stalin refused to pull Soviet troops out of northern Iran. This became one of the very first crises of the Cold War, and the Soviets were ultimately forced out, a nuclear superpower forced out of Iran. So this is a pattern. Let me be absolutely clear about this, because I want you to understand it at a deep level. Iran is not just a country, it is a civilizational force. It has been continuously inhabited for over 3,000 years. It has one of the oldest continuous cultures on the face of this earth. And throughout all of history, every empire that has tried to permanently dominate Iran has failed. The empires fell. Iran survived. Now I want to go deeper. I want to use game theory and structural analysis to explain why this pattern keeps repeating itself. Because this is not just luck or geography. There are specific structural reasons why Iran defeats empires. Reason 1, strategic depth. Iran is a very large country, 4 times the size of Iraq, with a population of 90 million people. It has the Zagros Mountains in the west, the Alborz Mountains in the north, deserts and brutal terrain in every direction. Napoleon famously said, never march on Moscow. He could just as easily have said, never march on Tehran. Conquering Iran would require a minimum of 3 to 4 million soldiers on the ground. The entire active United States military sits at around 1.3 million. So the math simply does not work. There is no scenario in which America has enough soldiers to control Iranian territory. None. Reason 2, the inverted military pyramid. This concept is critically important. In a normal military structure, you have a cost pyramid. At the base, the largest group, you have infantry soldiers. They are cheap, flexible, and can operate anywhere. Above them, you have armor and tanks. Above that, naval power. And at the very top, the most expensive and least flexible asset of all, you have air power. Wars are generally wars of attrition. To win a war of attrition, your cheapest and most flexible resource soldiers must form the base of your strategy. That is how every successful empire in history fought its wars. But America has an inverted pyramid. Air power sits at the base. Everything is built around air power. Why? Because of the military-industrial complex. Air power is the most expensive option. It generates the most contracts. It makes the most money for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon. So the entire American military strategy is built around selling expensive weapon systems, not around actually winning wars. That is why you have the F-35 fighter jet at $100 million each, taking 26 years to develop, and the Iranians shoot one down. That is why you have the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier at $13 billion, and it has to retreat from the Persian Gulf just 3 weeks after arriving. That is why you have the Patriot missile system costing billions of dollars, while cheap Iranian drones fly right past it. The American military is not designed to win wars. It is designed to generate profit for the military-industrial complex. Against Iran, this is catastrophic. Reason 3, asymmetric cost exchange. This is perhaps the most devastating strategic reality facing America right now. I want you to really sit with this because this is how Iran destroys empires today. Not with swords or horses, but with mathematics. Consider this. One Iranian drone costs $50,000. One American interceptor missile costs between $3 million and $10 million, depending on the system. So every time Iran launches a single drone and America tries to shoot it down, America spends at minimum 60 times more money than Iran spent. 60 times. And Iran does not launch one drone. Iran launches hundreds of drones simultaneously, overwhelming American air defenses all at once. We saw a single Iranian ballistic missile being targeted by 11 different American interceptors. All 11 missed. That is tens of millions of dollars in American firepower gone to stop one missile. America is racing to complete its mission before it simply runs out of interceptors. Let me say that again. The most powerful military in human history is racing against the clock before it runs out of weapons. That is the reality of this war right now. And this is ancient Persian strategy. You do not fight the empire head on. You bleed it slowly. You drain its resources. You exhaust its will. This is exactly what the Parthians did to Rome for 300 years. This is what the Iranians are doing to America today. Reason 4, the will to fight. This brings us to perhaps the single most important strategic factor of all. I want you to understand something about Iranian civilization. This is not just a government fighting a war. This is a civilization that has been fighting for its survival for 3,000 years. In Iranian eschatology, in their religious worldview, this war against America and Israel is literally a war against the great Satan. This is existential. This is sacred. In any war, you need 3 things: unity, capacity, and determination. Iran has all 3. What about America? Only 40% of Americans support this war. The administration is asking for a $20 billion war budget from a Congress that is deeply and bitterly divided. The Pentagon is afraid to report casualties because of the political backlash. American soldiers are dying, and the government is hiding the numbers. The contrast could not be more striking. On one side, you have a civilization that has been preparing for this war for 20 years, studying American tactics, building drone factories, mapping every American base across the Middle East. On the other side, you have an administration that had no plan beyond the opening round of bombing and simply assumed Iran would surrender. They never expected Iran to fight back. That is the level of arrogance and hubris we are dealing with. Now, I want to discuss something critically important. War is not only fought on the battlefield. War is fought across 4 dimensions simultaneously: the military dimension, the economic dimension, the political dimension, and the narrative dimension. Here is the key insight. America is trying to force the political, economic, and narrative dimensions to conform to its military strategy. Iran is using its military moves to actively shape the political, economic, and narrative dimensions. These are completely opposite approaches, and Iran's approach is far more sophisticated. America's strategy is simple. Bomb Iran into submission, force a surrender, install a friendly government, control the oil. That is the entire plan. For this to work, America needs the economy to stay stable, its allies to stay loyal, and the media to stay supportive. But what is actually happening? The economy is being disrupted. Oil prices are threatening to climb above $100 a barrel. Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, the largest asset management firm in the world, the man who oversees trillions of dollars, went on the BBC and said, paraphrasing, that if Iran maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz, we could see $150 oil for years. That means a global recession. The head of the world's largest investment firm is on television warning about recession because of this war. That is not a stable economy supporting a military strategy. That is an economy being held hostage by Iranian military strategy. Iran's approach is completely different. Iran's military moves are calibrated to achieve economic, political, and narrative goals all at the same time. They control the Strait of Hormuz, but Chinese ships pass freely because China is Iran's primary oil buyer. Friendly nations like Qatar and Oman are accommodated without disruption. This is not random aggression. This is precise, calculated geopolitical leverage. Politically, Iran is splitting the Gulf states apart. Qatar and Oman are drifting away from the American position. Even Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who wanted regime change in Iran, are watching nervously as their water supplies and food imports come under serious threat. On the narrative front, Iran is winning global public opinion. Large numbers of ordinary Americans are openly rooting for Iran in this war. That is extraordinary. That has never happened before in an American war. And it tells you everything you need to know about how the narrative dimension is playing out. Now, I want to discuss something even more significant. This war is not just about Iran. It is about the entire architecture of American global power. At the center of that architecture is the petrodollar system. Here's how it works. Since 1973, almost all oil in the world has been traded in US dollars. This was a deal struck between America and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would sell oil only in dollars, and America would protect the Saudi regime in return. Because everyone needs oil, everyone needs dollars. This creates permanent global demand for the US dollar, which allows America to print money, run enormous deficits, and finance its entire empire. Without the petrodollar system, America cannot afford its military. Without its military, America cannot maintain its empire. Now, what is happening in this war? The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is now effectively controlling, carries 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Iran is demonstrating to the world that it, not America, controls the flow of Middle Eastern oil. Every single day, this continues. The credibility of the petrodollar system erodes further. The Gulf states, the very linchpin of that system, are under direct and immediate threat. The GCC gets 90% of its food imports through the Strait of Hormuz. Desalination plants that provide 60% of GCC fresh water are now vulnerable to $50,000 Iranian drones. If those plants are struck, cities of 10 million people run out of drinking water within 2 weeks. The Gulf states are terrified. A terrified Gulf state that can no longer guarantee its own survival may no longer be willing to recycle petrodollars back into American stock markets and AI data centers. If that flow stops, the AI bubble bursts. The entire American financial system begins to unravel from within. This is how Iran destroys empires, not by conquering them outright, but by making the cost of empire unsustainable, by making the financial architecture of empire collapse from the inside. We have clear historical precedent for this. The Soviet Union did not lose the Cold War because America defeated it on the battlefield. It lost because the cost of maintaining empire became impossible to sustain. Afghanistan was part of that equation. Iran may be America's Afghanistan on a dramatically larger scale. Now I want to address why America cannot simply adapt to the situation. You might ask, if things are this bad, why does America not change strategy, negotiate, or find an exit? The answer is that the quality of American governance has collapsed. China just completed its 15th five-year plan, 2 years of consultation, expert committees, think tanks across the entire country, leading academic specialists contributing throughout. It is a detailed, serious, and comprehensive plan for the future of 1.4 billion people. What does America have? The State of the Union has become a television performance. There is no serious work program, no strategic plan, no real analytical framework guiding decisions. The tariff war of 2025, which shook the global economy, was produced by 4 or 5 people with a one-page document that would not pass review in a first-year economics course. This is the same administration that decided to bomb Iran. No plan beyond the opening strikes, no strategy for what comes next. Just an assumption, a completely delusional assumption that Iran would simply fold. Compare this to Iran. Iran has been preparing for this confrontation for 20 years. 2 full decades of planning. They analyzed the American military in detail. They mapped every American base in the region. They built drone factories. They studied the psychology of American decision-making. They understood that America's political will is fragile, that America's manufacturing capacity is limited, and that America fears casualties above everything else. They built their entire strategy around exactly those weaknesses. This is the difference between a civilization that has survived 3,000 years by learning from every attack and adapting accordingly, and an empire that has been dominant for 80 years and has simply forgotten how to think seriously about strategy. Let me now bring everything together. I want to give you my prediction, not as prophecy, but as an analytical framework grounded in structural history and game theory. I have made 3 predictions since 2024. First, that Trump would win. That happened. Second, that America would go to war with Iran. That happened. Third, that America will lose this war and that this loss will permanently reshape the global order. That is what I believe we are watching unfold right now. Let me be precise about what I mean by lose. I do not mean that Iran will defeat America on the battlefield in any traditional military sense. Iran cannot do that. America is still the most powerful military force on earth. What I mean is this. America will find that the cost of continuing this war in money, in political will, in casualties, in global reputation, and in economic disruption will become impossible to sustain. America will be forced to pull back from the Middle East. When that happens, when the American empire retreats, two regional powers will remain standing, Israel and Iran. And the entire Middle East will be reorganized around those two forces. Here is the deeper historical truth I want to leave you with. Every empire falls. That is the true lesson of history. Rome fell. The Mongol Empire fell. The British Empire fell. The Soviet Empire fell. Not because they were defeated militarily in one single decisive battle, but because they overextended themselves, because they could not sustain the cost of empire, because their internal contradictions, their corruption, their loss of purpose, and their arrogance finally caught up with them. America is experiencing every single one of these things right now. A military designed to generate profit rather than win wars, a government that cannot think beyond the next news cycle. A political system so corrupted that $2 trillion vanishes from the Pentagon budget and nobody is ever held accountable. A financial system so fragile that it depends entirely on Gulf state petrodollars being recycled into a stock market bubble. And Iran, ancient Persia, is simply doing what it has always done. It is waiting. It is bleeding the empire slowly and patiently. It is taking its time because Iran has time. Iran has always had time. Iran has outlasted every empire that ever attacked it. And it will outlast this one too. Alexander the Great came to Persia and his empire died with him. Rome fought Persia for 300 years and felt the Mongols conquered Persia and became Persian. The Soviets occupied Iran and were driven out. And now America. The graveyard of empires is not Afghanistan. The graveyard of empires, the original, the oldest, the most patient of all, is Iran. That is my analysis for today. This is not prophecy. This is structural history combined with game theory. I want you to keep your mind open. I want you to challenge everything I have said. I want you to look at the evidence and think for yourself. That is what predictive history means.